They say money can buy almost anything but for one lonely boy. Born into wealth, yet carrying the burden of a missing leg, no fortune could buy him a friend. Day after day, he stood apart, invisible in the shadow of his father's empire, until one brave little girl, with nothing but kindness in her heart, stepped forward and changed his life forever. If you stay with me through this story, you may find yourself surprised by the power of love, forgiveness, and the meaning of family. To everyone listening right now, I send you my warmest blessings. May your days be gentle, your nights peaceful, and your home filled with love. Tell me, dear friends, which country are you listening from, and what time is it where you are? Nobody ever waved back at Caleb Whitmore when he passed through the crowded school hallway until one fall afternoon when something unexpected happened. The hallways of Street. Andrews Episcopal School in Austin carried the sound of sneakers squeaking against polished floors, the smell of peanut butter sandwiches lingering from lunch, and the laughter of children darting past each other. Yet, in that rush of voices, Caleb was a quiet shadow. At 6 years old, he was already skilled at making himself smaller, as though the world would be easier if he simply disappeared into the lockers lining the walls. Other boys and girls ran in pairs, trading Halloween ideas, witches, superheroes, cowboys. Caleb kept his eyes low, his small hand gripping the strap of his backpack, the weight uneven because of the prosthetic leg that clinked faintly with each step. The rhythm of his walk was different, and different was enough for children to notice. At lunch, he slid into the farthest corner of the cafeteria. The long tables buzzed with chatter, trays filled with sloppy joes, cartons of milk, and bright orange pumpkin cookies that the cafeteria ladies had set out for the season. Caleb had mac and cheese on his plate. He pushed it around with a fork, careful not to look up. Across the table, two boys leaned in toward each other. Their voices weren't meant to carry, but to a child tuned to whispers. Every word landed sharp. "Bet his robot leg can't even climb the jungle gym," one said, smirking. "Maybe he recharges it at night," the other snickered. Caleb felt heat rise to his cheeks. He wanted to vanish. He shifted so his right pant leg covered the metal just a bit more. The sound of chairs scraping pulled him back as the lunch period ended. Children spilled out, leaving crumbs and laughter behind. Caleb trailed out last, adjusting his backpack, careful with every step. Later that afternoon, Jonathan Whitmore appeared for pickup in a sleek, black Tesla. The other parents waved, some calling out greetings like, "Good evening, Jonathan." He gave the kind of polite nod that came with being a man who signed checks and funded school projects. He had the look of a man pressed for time, tie loosened, phone glowing in his hand. Caleb climbed into the back seat without a word. The hum of the electric car filled the silence. Jonathan's voice came flat, distracted. "Ready, champ. I've got a late call tonight. We'll order dinner in." "Ugh." Caleb nodded, pressing his forehead against the cool window glass. Outside, Austin's trees were turning colors, gold mixing with red. Houses already displayed carved pumpkins, candles glowing inside them. Families walked hand in hand, children tugging at sleeves, pointing at costumes in shop windows. Caleb watched until it all blurred, a reminder of things just out of reach. When they reached the sprawling Whitmore house in Westlake Hills, Madeline was already waiting at the door. Her heels clicked on the marble floor as she bent to kiss Jonathan's cheek, her perfume crisp and deliberate. She looked at Caleb briefly, smoothing her blouse. "Homework first, Caleb. Dinner later," she said, her voice like porcelain, smooth but breakable. Caleb nodded again, slipping away toward his room. Upstairs, the house was quiet, almost too quiet. His toys lined up neatly, a bookshelf filled with volumes no child had opened, and a bed perfectly made by the housekeeper that morning. He sat on the edge, listening to the muffled murmur of Jonathan's voice downstairs on another business call. From his window, he saw the neighborhood kids racing down the cul-de-sac, their bikes rattling, their laughter echoing. He touched the metal curve of his prosthetic under the fabric and wondered if he'd ever ride like them, carefree and fast. That night, dinner was Thai takeout eaten in silence at the long dining table. Jonathan glanced at his phone more than at his son. Madeline scrolled through her tablet, discussing social events. Caleb chewed quietly, swallowing the loneliness that tasted stronger than the food itself. Later, in bed, he stared at the ceiling. The house was grand, the kind people drove by and admired, but to him, it felt like a place built for echo. He closed his eyes, wishing for something simple, someone to sit beside him, someone who'd notice if he disappeared. On his way home from school the next day, shoulders hunched, Caleb walked along the sidewalk when a clear voice broke through the fog of his thoughts. "Hey, are you okay?" Caleb froze at the sound of the voice. He turned, half expecting more teasing, but instead found a girl with a red hoodie too big for her frame. Her sneakers were scuffed, and the zipper of her backpack hung loose like it had been fixed more than once. She stood there with a half smile that didn't carry mockery, but something else concerned. Caleb hesitated. Children usually looked past him or at his leg. This girl looked straight into his eyes. I'm fine," he mumbled. "You don't look fine," she replied, tilting her head. "But that's okay. My grandma says folks carry storms inside sometimes." Before Caleb could answer, a rusty pickup truck honked nearby. An older woman with silver hair tied back in a bun waved from the driver's seat, thermos in hand. "Harper, let's go, honey. Supper's waiting." The girl, Harper, he realized, rolled her eyes playfully, then gave Caleb a small nod as if to say, "I'll see you again." She ran toward the truck, her backpack bouncing, leaving Caleb standing with the faint warmth of something unusual, being noticed. That night, at the Whitmore house, the world returned to its usual pattern. Jonathan was buried in calls. Madeline corrected Caleb's posture at the dinner table, and silence filled the spaces between clinking silverware. But in Caleb's mind, there was a flicker he couldn't shake. Someone had spoken to him kindly, with no agenda, no judgment. Upstairs in his room, he pressed his forehead to the glass again, watching the neighborhood lights twinkle. For the first time, his heart didn't feel entirely heavy. A stranger's voice lingered like a promise. Maybe not everyone would look away. He didn't know yet how that moment would ripple through his life, or how one girl in a red hoodie and her grandmother would open doors he thought were sealed forever. For now, he just lay in bed, the hum of the house around him, wondering what it might feel like to have a friend. On his way home, a girl's voice called, "Hey, are you okay?" The afternoon sun dipped lower over Austin, throwing long shadows across the schoolyard as children spilled out of the doors. The air carried the scent of fallen leaves and the sound of sneakers hitting the blacktop. Caleb moved slower than the rest, his backpack tugging at one shoulder. He kept to the edge of the playground, hoping to slip away before anyone noticed. But of course, someone always noticed. A pair of boys, the same ones who had whispered at lunch, blocked his path. "Bet you can't even make it to the swings," one jeered. The other laughed, pointing at Caleb's leg. "Don't trip, robot." Caleb's stomach knotted. He tried to walk past them, but his steps faltered, uneven and obvious. He felt the heat of shame creep up his neck. Then, like a gust of wind, a voice cut through. "Hey, knock it off." Harper Quinn strode over, red hoodie sleeves pushed up, eyes blazing. She planted herself between Caleb and the bullies with a confidence that startled him. "Coach already knows you two cheated in dodgeball yesterday," she snapped. "Want me to remind him?" The boys exchanged nervous glances. For all their bravado, neither wanted to face the wrath of Coach Thompson, who had a sharp eye for dishonesty. Muttering excuses, they backed away, their swagger deflating as quickly as it had come. Caleb blinked. No one had ever stepped in like that before. "Why'd you do that?" he asked quietly, almost afraid of the answer. Harper shrugged, her ponytail swaying. "Because friends stick up for each other. That's what my grandma says." The word friends hung in the air, fragile and unfamiliar. Caleb didn't know how to respond, so he just nodded, his throat tight. The dismissal bell rang, and kids scattered toward their rides home. Harper jerked her chin toward the parking lot. "Commande, my grandma's waiting. You can walk with us." Caleb hesitated. He rarely walked with anyone, but Harper didn't seem to notice his uncertainty. She was already heading toward the line of cars and trucks, the strap of her worn backpack slipping off her shoulder. At the curb, an older woman leaned against a rusty blue pickup, sipping coffee from a dented thermos. Her hair, streaked silver, was tied back neatly, and her eyes were sharp but kind. When she saw Harper approaching with Caleb trailing behind, her brows lifted slightly. "This him?" she asked, her voice low and steady. "Yeah," Harper replied, tugging on Caleb's sleeve. "This is Caleb." The woman studied him for a moment, her gaze dropping to the awkward angle of his step. Then she smiled gently. "Well, it's good to meet you, Caleb. I'm Evelyn. You two ready? Dinner won't cook itself." Caleb nodded shyly, clutching his backpack straps tighter. He wasn't used to introductions, not like this. Something about the way Evelyn looked at him, not with pity, but with genuine attention, made his chest feel warm. As Harper scrambled into the truck, Evelyn lingered just a little longer, her eyes narrowing thoughtfully at the way Caleb shifted his weight. It was the kind of look only someone who had seen much of life could carry, a look that suggested she noticed more than she let on. Caleb lingered by the truck door, unsure if he should climb in or simply wave goodbye. He wasn't used to being invited, not like this. Harper leaned over from the passenger seat, grinning. "Come on, Grandma doesn't bite." Evelyn chuckled, fastening her seatbelt. "Only when folks lie about finishing their homework." Caleb gave a small smile, almost against his will, and stepped closer. He didn't get in, just stood there, listening to the hum of the truck's old engine. Evelyn tilted her head, studying him again. "Your leg giving you trouble, son?" she asked gently. Caleb froze. His throat tightened. He wasn't supposed to talk about it, not with strangers, not even with people who cared. Madeline always insisted, "It's fine. Don't make it a thing." He shook his head quickly, eyes darting down. "No, ma'am. I'm fine." Evelyn's lips pursed as if she knew better, but she didn't press. She just nodded, shifting into gear. "All right then. Take care of yourself, Caleb. Harper'll see you tomorrow." End of fic. As the truck rumbled out of the lot, Harper stuck her head out the window, hair flying in the wind. "See ya. Don't forget we're friends now." Her words echoed in his ears long after the truck disappeared. Caleb stood there, stunned. No one had ever claimed him as a friend before, not so easily, not without hesitation. That evening, back at the Whitmore house, the contrast hit him harder than usual. Jonathan came home late, loosening his tie as he walked through the door, his phone pressed to his ear. Madeline greeted him with a kiss on the cheek, then shot Caleb a glance as though to remind him to stay quiet. At dinner, the clatter of silverware was the only sound. Caleb pushed peas around his plate, while Jonathan spoke in clipped tones about market shares and partnerships. Madeline mentioned an upcoming gala, her voice smooth and practiced. Caleb chewed silently, hearing Harper's voice replaying in his head. Friends stick up for each other. Later, upstairs in his room, Caleb sat at his desk, staring at a blank sheet of paper. He thought of drawing, maybe sketching the red hoodie that had flashed across his vision that afternoon. Instead, he set the pencil down and looked out the window. The street outside glowed with porch lights and carved pumpkins, families laughing as they set up decorations. He closed his eyes and whispered the word quietly, testing it on his tongue. Friend. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel completely invisible. Something had shifted. Harper Quinn and her grandmother had stepped into his orbit, and though Caleb didn't fully understand it yet, he sensed that his life had started to change. As he lay in bed, the memory of Harper's defiant stance in the schoolyard replayed in his mind. She hadn't cared that he walked differently. She hadn't flinched at the sound of his prosthetic. She had simply stood tall, declared herself on his side, and left no room for doubt. It was a simple thing, maybe, just a girl in a red hoodie chasing off a couple of bullies. But to Caleb, it was monumental. For once, the storm inside him felt a little lighter. And somewhere, deep down, Evelyn's thoughtful gaze lingered with him too, as though she had seen the secret he carried, the pain he could never admit aloud. As the house grew quiet, Caleb pulled the blanket close and let his eyes close. The last thing he heard in his memory before drifting to sleep was Harper's cheerful call, ringing like a promise. "See ya! Don't forget we're friends now." For the first time in a long while, Caleb went to bed with a small smile, carrying Harper's words with him. Don't forget, we're friends now. Monday morning, sunlight slanted through the classroom blinds, striping Caleb's desk with pale gold. He sat hunched over his notebook, trying to disappear into the wood grain. The other kids were buzzing with weekend stories, birthday parties, football games, trips to Barton Springs. Caleb had nothing to add, and even if he did, he wasn't sure his voice would carry. A boy at the back leaned forward, whispering just loud enough for others to hear. "Hey, robot leg. Bet you can't run like the rest of us." Laughter rippled across a few desks. Caleb froze, his pencil trembling in his hand. He wanted to sink through the floor. Before he could reply, a voice cut through the snickers. Harper, sitting 2 rows over, slammed her book shut. "Leave him alone. At least he's brave enough to show up every day. What's your excuse?" The room went quiet. The boy looked away, cheeks red. The teacher, pretending not to notice, turned back to the chalkboard. But Caleb noticed the corners of Harper's mouth curl in a small, defiant smile. At recess, Caleb lingered near the fence, away from the basketball court. Harper walked over, still carrying her sketchbook. She sat beside him in the grass without asking permission. "You don't have to listen to them," she said, flipping her pencil between her fingers. "Kids tease when they're scared of what they don't understand." Caleb stared at the ground. "They'll never stop." "Maybe not," Harper admitted. Then she tore a sheet from her sketchbook and scribbled quickly. She handed it to him, 2 stick figures, one with glasses, the other with a slightly bent leg. Underneath, she wrote, "Friends." Caleb blinked. "You drew me?" "Us," Harper corrected. "Friends stick up for each other, that's the rule." Something shifted in Caleb's chest, a warmth he hadn't expected. For the first time in a long while, he smiled without forcing it. That evening, Evelyn noticed the paper folded in Caleb's pocket when he came by her trailer with Harper. She invited them in for cookies. As the kids munched, Evelyn pulled Harper aside in the kitchen. "You've got a good heart, Harper," she said softly. "But remember, Caleb's been carrying more weight than most kids his age. He'll need time to trust." Harper nodded solemnly, as if accepting a mission. "I can wait." Evelyn patted her shoulder. "That patience will mean more to him than you know. M." In the living room, Caleb traced the drawing again and again, the corners already soft from being folded and unfolded. For once, he felt less like a boy with a limp and more like someone who belonged. Later that night, Jonathan sat in his study, surrounded by ledgers and glass walls that offered no comfort. He had spent the evening reviewing numbers, but the lines of ink refused to hold his focus. His mind kept circling back to the same place, the look in Caleb's eyes when he came home from school. The boy hadn't complained outright. Caleb rarely did. But Jonathan noticed the way he walked slower than usual, the way his shoulders folded in as if to make himself invisible. When Jonathan had asked, Caleb only shrugged, muttering that he was fine. But Jonathan was learning that fine meant the opposite. He poured a drink and set it aside untouched. Instead, he opened the drawer where he kept the photograph Evelyn had shown him. The baby's hand, the woman's smile, it seemed to accuse him more sharply under lamplight. He wondered if Caleb ever saw that same hand when he reached for his father's and found nothing there. Across town, in the trailer's quiet kitchen, Evelyn was writing a letter. She had no intention of sending it, but sometimes words needed to be set down. "Children don't wait forever, Jonathan," she wrote. "Every day you hesitate, he learns to expect less." She folded the letter neatly, sliding it into a tin box with others she'd written but never mailed. In the small bedroom down the hall, Caleb lay awake, Harper's drawing tucked beneath his pillow. He traced the word friends with his finger, over and over, as if the letters might anchor him. He whispered into the dark, "Don't leave," though he wasn't sure if he meant his mother, his father, or Harper. The next morning at school, the teasing returned, though less bold. Harper stuck by him, daring anyone to make another comment. When one boy muttered under his breath, Harper shot back, "Bet he's braver than you'll ever be." Caleb flushed with embarrassment, but a flicker of pride stirred too. That afternoon, Jonathan surprised Caleb by picking him up from school himself, instead of sending the driver. The boy hesitated at the curb, then climbed into the passenger seat. The ride was quiet at first. Then Jonathan cleared his throat. "Your teacher said you did well on your reading quiz." Caleb stared out the window. "I guess." Jonathan glanced at him, trying again. "When I was your age, I hated reading out loud." My voice shook every time. Caleb turned, eyes wide. "Really?" Jonathan nodded. "Really. I got better because someone sat with me every night and listened. I should have done that for you." For a long stretch of road, Caleb said nothing. Then softly, he whispered, "You still can." Jonathan gripped the steering wheel tighter, his throat thick. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was an opening. Back at the estate, Caleb went straight to his room, Harper's drawing still folded in his pocket. Jonathan stood in the doorway, watching him for a moment before retreating. For the first time in years, he felt the walls of his house pressing in not because they were too small, but because they were too empty. The Whitmore estate was quiet that evening. too quiet. The long corridors swallowed sound, the polished floors reflecting the emptiness more than the grandeur. Jonathan wandered into his study, loosening his tie, the weight of the day pressing heavily on his shoulders. He hadn't intended to look through the old trunk stored in the back of the closet, but something tugged at him. Perhaps it was Caleb's eyes earlier, tired, wary, carrying unspoken questions. He pulled the trunk into the light, dust rising in the air. Inside were things he had locked away for years. At the top, folded carefully, was a scarf embroidered with delicate flowers. The thread had faded, but the stitches carried the unmistakable hand of Caleb's mother. Jonathan lifted it slowly, pressing it to his face. For a fleeting moment, he could almost hear her laugh again, see her holding their infant son. Beneath the scarf lay a small journal. Its leather cover was worn, the pages thin. He opened it and read a line in her looping handwriting. He kicks so much at night. I wonder if he'll be restless like his father, always searching for something more. Jonathan's hands shook. He had been searching that night too, chasing deals, chasing appearances, chasing everything except what truly mattered. The sound of heels clicking on marble broke his trance. Madeline entered, her posture as impeccable as ever, a glass of wine in hand. Her eyes narrowed when she saw the scarf draped across his lap. "What are you doing with that?" she asked, her voice cool. Jonathan looked up, caught. "Remembering," he admitted softly. Madeline's smile was thin. "Remembering won't change the present. That woman's gone, Jonathan, and dwelling on the past won't help Caleb fit into this family." He stood, bristling. That woman was his mother, and Caleb deserves to know she mattered. Madeline set her glass down sharply, the crystal clink echoing. "You think I haven't sacrificed? I've kept this house spotless, kept our name untarnished, kept the boy out of pity's reach. Do you really want to unravel all of that by indulging in sentiment?" Jonathan's voice hardened. "It's not sentiment, it's truth, and I'm beginning to see that covering it up has done more damage than honesty ever could." Madeline's eyes flashed, but she didn't reply. She turned on her heel and left, her perfume trailing in the air like smoke after a fire. Jonathan sank back into his chair, the scarf still in his hands, his chest heavy with a grief that had never been given permission to breathe. The house was hushed after Madeline left, but Jonathan couldn't sit still. He walked the halls, past portraits of Whitmores in gilded frames, men and women who had built legacies of power and control. None of their eyes seemed kind. None of them knew Caleb. Jonathan stopped outside his son's room. The door was ajar, a sliver of lamplight spilling onto the hallway carpet. He peeked in. Caleb was bent over his desk, crayons scattered, drawing clumsy shapes on printer paper. "Hey, champ," Jonathan said quietly, stepping inside. "Couldn't sleep?" Caleb startled, then shrugged. "I'm just drawing." Jonathan crouched beside him. The picture showed a small stick figure with a crooked line for a leg, standing beside a taller figure with messy hair. The lines wavered, but the meaning was clear. "That's me?" Jonathan asked gently. Caleb hesitated, then nodded. "I think so, but you're not here much, so I wasn't sure." The words cut deeper than any courtroom accusation. Jonathan's chest tightened. He touched the edge of the paper. "I want to be here more. I should have been here all along." Caleb studied him, trying to read if the promise was real. Then, quietly, he asked, "Did my mom, like to draw too?" Jonathan's throat closed. He thought of the scarf, the journal, the way her laughter had filled smaller rooms than this mansion. "She did," he whispered. "She loved to draw flowers. Maybe that's where you get it from." For the first time, Caleb smiled without reservation. It was small, fragile, but it lit the room brighter than any chandelier. Jonathan tucked the boy into bed, his heart aching with both loss and hope. As he closed the door, Evelyn's words returned. "Children don't wait forever." He realized Caleb hadn't stopped waiting yet, and that was his miracle to lose. Back in the study, Jonathan folded the scarf and placed it carefully on his desk. He left the journal open to the line he'd read earlier. For the first time in decades, he let himself grieve, not as a businessman or a husband protecting appearances, but as a man who had loved and lost. Down the hall, Caleb dreamed quietly, the drawing still on his desk. Tomorrow, there would be more questions, more challenges, more resistance from Madeline. But tonight, There was a crack in the fortress of silence, a shadow of the past that had begun to turn toward light. The Four Seasons ballroom glittered that Friday evening, chandeliers scattering light across polished marble and gowns sequined like stars. The Whitmore Gala was always the talk of Austin's elite, and tonight was no exception. Donors mingled with business leaders, glasses chimed, and laughter echoed beneath vaulted ceilings. To everyone else, it was a triumph. To Jonathan, it felt like a performance he no longer wanted to play. Madeline floated through the crowd, radiant in her sapphire dress, her smile flawless. She greeted each guest with practiced warmth, her hand-grazing arms, her laugh measured in perfect beats. She was the image of control. Jonathan watched from the bar, his tie tied around his throat, a glass of untouched bourbon in his hand. "Jonathan Whitmore," a voice called warmly. He turned to see Robert Ellis, an old friend from college days, silver now streaking his hair. Robert clapped him on the back. "Still running the world, I see." Jonathan forced a smile. "Trying to keep up." Robert leaned in, his tone dropping with nostalgia. "Do you remember that summer in San Marcos? When you used to drive out just to see her? Evelyn's sister, Lord? What was her name?" Jonathan froze. The noise of the gala blurred into static. Robert chuckled, not noticing. "Ah, she was a firecracker. The way you looked at her back then... Well, I never thought you'd be the one to settle for marble halls." Madeline appeared at Jonathan's side at that exact moment, her smile fixed but her eyes sharp. "Jonathan," she said sweetly, "aren't you going to introduce me?" Robert straightened. "Of course, Mrs. Whitmore, a pleasure. I was just reminding your husband of his wilder days." Madeline's hand tightened on Jonathan's arm. "How charming." Her tone was syrupy, but her nails dug crescents into his sleeve. Robert excused himself quickly, sensing the tension. When he was gone, Madeline's smile dropped. "What was that about?" Jonathan swallowed, heat rising in his chest. "The past, nothing more." Madeline's eyes narrowed. "You let your past wander into my gala. Don't you see how dangerous that is?" He turned to face her fully. "Dangerous? It's the truth, Madeline. And maybe it's time Caleb knows it." Her voice turned to ice. "Do you want to ruin him? To have the city whisper that the Whitmores raised a boy born of scandal and sentiment?" Jonathan's anger finally cracked through years of restraint. "I want him to know he's loved. More than the marble. More than the image. That's all I want." For the first time in public, Madeline's facade faltered. Her lips thinned, her eyes blazing with fury she could no longer disguise. Around them, the gala swirled on, oblivious. But Jonathan felt the fracture widen between them, a break that could no longer be hidden beneath champagne and pearls. Jonathan didn't wait for her reply. He left the ballroom, the sound of clinking glasses chasing him down the marble corridor. For the first time in years, he didn't care how it looked to walk out in the middle of his wife's carefully staged performance. Outside on the balcony, the city stretched before him, lights blinking like restless stars. He loosened his tie, the cool night air filling his lungs, yet his chest ached. Robert's words still echoed in his ears the way you looked at her back then. He hadn't realized it was visible to anyone else. The glass door slid open again. Madeline stepped out, her heels clicking against the stone. She stood beside him, her voice low but cutting. "You embarrassed me tonight. Do you have any idea what people will say?" Jonathan kept his gaze on the skyline. "They'll say what they want, but maybe for once I won't care." Her laughter was sharp, brittle. "You can't afford not to care. Our lives, our name, everything we've built, it depends on what people think." He turned to her, eyes dark. "No, Madeline. It depends on who we are when the doors close. And right now, we're nothing but strangers living in a museum." Her face hardened. "If you continue down this path, Jonathan, you'll destroy everything, and I won't be standing beside you when it crumbles. Then maybe it's time I stop pretending I want you to." The silence between them was colder than the night air. Madeline's eyes glinted, but she said nothing more. She turned sharply, disappearing back into the golden glow of the gala. Jonathan remained on the balcony, the photograph heavy in his pocket. He pulled it out, staring again at the baby's hand gripping his mother's finger. The memory felt sharper now, almost accusing. He whispered into the night, "I won't fail him again." Later, when the gala finally ended, Jonathan drove himself home. The house was quiet when he entered, Caleb's window glowing faintly upstairs. Jonathan climbed the steps, pausing at the boy's door. Inside, Caleb was awake, fiddling with Harper's drawing beneath the lamp. "Couldn't sleep?" Jonathan asked, stepping in. Caleb shook his head. "Too noisy downstairs." Jonathan sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress dipping. "It's quiet now." He hesitated, then added, "I'm sorry you weren't invited tonight. You should have been there." Caleb blinked, surprised. "At the party?" "Yes, because you're my son, and I want the world to see you, not hide you." Caleb studied him carefully, as though weighing the truth in those words. Then, slowly, he nodded. Jonathan tucked him in, brushing a stray hair from his forehead. When he closed the door, the house no longer felt like marble and silence. It felt like a place waiting to be filled with voices, with memories, with family. And Jonathan knew, if he had to choose between the image and his son, he would choose Caleb every time. The Quinn's trailer seemed smaller than ever as Jonathan sat at the kitchen table, but the warmth inside pressed against the walls. The lamp above hummed faintly, catching dust motes in its glow, while Evelyn set down mugs of peppermint tea with the precision of someone who knew exactly what comfort looked like. Jonathan held the scarf between his hands, the embroidery faint beneath his fingers. His voice was low, uncertain. "I should have kept this where Caleb could see it. He deserves to know she existed beyond a photograph." Evelyn lowered herself into the chair across from him. Her eyes softened, though her words did not. "She used to sit right here, sewing that scarf while her belly grew round. I remember her saying she wanted her boy to know beauty in simple things. She laughed when he kicked so hard she dropped the thread. You were gone that night, Chicago, wasn't it?" Jonathan closed his eyes, a sharp ache blooming behind them. He had no memory of what deal he struck in Chicago, but the memory Evelyn described cut deeper than any contract ever could. On the couch, Harper stirred, setting her crayons aside. She slipped off the cushion and came to the table, holding 2 new sheets of paper. "I made more drawings today. For Caleb." The first showed a little boy standing under a tree, a dog at his side, a tall man in glasses watching from nearby. "This one's for when he wants to feel strong," Harper explained. The second showed 3 figures again, but this time the background was a house with light spilling from its windows. "And this is for when he wants to feel safe." Jonathan's throat closed. He touched the corner of the drawing with reverence, as though afraid the crayon lines might smudge under his hand. "Do you really think he can feel that? With me?" Harper tilted her head, childlike wisdom in her eyes. "He already wants to. He just doesn't know if you'll stay long enough." And the door creaked then, and Caleb stepped inside, his sneakers damp from the grass. He froze when he saw the drawing spread across the table. His gaze darted from his father to Evelyn to Harper. "What's happening?" he asked, suspicion laced in his small voice. Jonathan stood, the scarf still in his hand. For a moment he looked as if he might falter, but then he knelt to Caleb's height. "We're talking about your mom," he said softly, "and about the truth I should have told you long ago." "Oh." Caleb lingered near the doorframe, his hand brushing the peeling paint as though ready to bolt. Evelyn gave him a gentle nod, signaling safety. Harper pushed the drawing toward him eagerly. "Look, Caleb, it's us. A family." Caleb took the paper hesitantly, his eyes scanning the figures. His voice cracked. "But families don't leave." Jonathan swallowed hard. "You're right, and I left. I can't undo that, but if you'll let me, I'll spend the rest of my days proving that I won't walk away again." The boy's shoulders hunched, torn between doubt and hope. "You say that now, but when people laugh, when it's hard, you'll go back to your work." Jonathan reached for the scarf, pressing it into Caleb's hands. "Your mom made this for you." Every stitch was her saying, "I'll love you forever." She never left, not really, and neither will I. I see that now. Caleb clutched the scarf, burying his face in its faded fabric. His small shoulders trembled. Jonathan gathered him into his arms, the weight of the child both fragile and unyielding. Harper leaned against them, her messy ponytail brushing Caleb's cheek. For the first time, it looked almost natural. 3 shapes forming one circle. Later, Jonathan led Caleb outside into the night air. The stars were faint above Austin's haze, but the crickets sang steadily in the grass. They sat on the steps together, Harper darting inside to fetch cookies. Jonathan broke the silence. When I was your age, I was scared too. Not of a leg that hurt, but of being enough. I thought if I worked hard, people would stay. Turns out, people just need you to be there. That's what I forgot. Caleb fiddled with the edge of the scarf. Do you think it's too late? Jonathan turned, eyes wet. No, because you're here asking me that. And as long as you ask, I'll answer. Every time. The boy leaned against him then, tentative but real. Jonathan felt the warmth seep into his side, anchoring him in a way no empire ever had. Inside, Evelyn watched from the window, her expression unreadable but her eyes glistening. When Harper returned balancing a plate of cookies, she plopped down beside them, offering one to Caleb first. See, families share snacks too. Caleb smiled faintly, crumbs dusting his lips. He looked up at his father, almost daring him. Will you still be here tomorrow? Jonathan wrapped an arm around him. Yes, champ. Tomorrow and every day after. The boy's eyes softened, the fear still present but no longer overwhelming. Harper leaned into both of them, her drawing still on the table inside, a crayon promise of a home that might at last become real. The morning of the hearing dawned cool and gray, Austin's skyline still wrapped in fog. Jonathan stood at the window of his study, tie draped loosely around his neck, hands trembling as he tried to knot it. For years, courtrooms had been places he dominated mergers, acquisitions, negotiations where he never lost. Today, the stakes were stripped of numbers and profit. Today, it was about a boy's trust. Downstairs, Caleb sat at the kitchen table of Evelyn's trailer, fidgeting with a piece of toast. He hadn't eaten more than a bite. Harper leaned across from him, chin in her hands. Don't worry, she whispered. We'll be there. You're not alone. Evelyn set a steadying hand on Caleb's shoulder. Sweetheart, this isn't about who's richer or louder. It's about truth. And truth has a way of shining through, even when people try to hide it. By the time they reached the Travis County Courthouse, the streets were buzzing with Friday traffic, the city oblivious to the storm brewing inside those stone walls. Jonathan held Caleb's hand firmly as they climbed the steps. The boy's palm was damp, but he didn't pull away. The courtroom smelled faintly of old wood and floor polish, the kind of place where history lingered. The benches creaked as reporters and community members filled them, drawn by the Whitmore name. At one side, Madeline sat poised, every strand of hair immaculate, her pearl earrings gleaming beneath the fluorescent lights. To anyone watching, she looked like order and control itself. The judge entered, gavel striking. This court will now consider the matter of custody for Caleb Whitmore. Madeline's attorney began first, his voice smooth as silk. Your Honor, my client has provided the boy with stability, discipline, and the dignity befitting his name. She has shielded him from cruelty by ensuring he is not subject to ridicule or pity. The Whitmore estate offers him opportunities beyond measure. Jonathan's jaw tightened. Those words, shielded, dignity, had once sounded noble. Now he heard only the bars of a cage. When his own attorney spoke, Jonathan interrupted, rising to his feet. Your Honor, may I speak for myself? The judge's brows lifted. Briefly, Jonathan turned to face the room, his voice rough. I used to believe what you just heard, that wealth and distance could protect a child. But protection isn't the same as love. Caleb doesn't need to be hidden from the world. He needs to be held by it. He needs a father who shows up, not one who hides behind marble walls. A ripple of murmurs moved through the gallery. Madeline's lips pressed into a hard line, her fingers clutching her pearls as though to steady herself. Then Dr. Ramirez, Caleb's physical therapist, was called. A wiry man with gentle eyes. He carried his notes but spoke from memory. I've worked with Caleb for 3 years. He never complains during therapy, never quits, even when the pain is sharp. But I've heard him say more than once, if I do better, maybe Dad will notice. That's not ambition, that's longing. Longing for recognition no exercise can give him. Jonathan bowed his head, guilt slamming into him with every word. He had missed so many sessions, sent assistants in his place, told himself his work was too important. Madeline's lawyer objected, but the judge allowed the testimony. Proceed. The courtroom door opened again. Mrs. Langford, Caleb's teacher, shuffled in with a file clasped to her chest. Her glasses trembled slightly as she took the stand. Caleb writes stories, beautiful ones, but he never volunteers to read them. When I asked him why, he said, "What if they laugh at me? Or my dad doesn't want to hear it? No child should believe their voice is unwelcome in their own home." Gasps sounded softly across the benches. Evelyn squeezed Caleb's hand, Harper squeezing his other. The boy ducked his head, cheeks burning, but he didn't let go of either hand. Jonathan rose again, his throat thick. "Your Honor, that's what I'm fighting for. Not just custody, but a chance to listen, to be the father I should have been years ago. I can't erase the past, but I can show my son that his voice matters, that he matters." Madeline shot to her feet, her composure finally cracking. "This is absurd," she snapped, her voice ringing across the chamber. "Jonathan was absent for years. I held this family together. And now you would trust him with the boy's future? He doesn't deserve it." The judge's gavel struck, sharp and final. "Mrs. Whitmore, sit down." But Jonathan turned, his voice calm, yet firm. "You're right, Madeline. I don't deserve forgiveness for the years I wasn't there. But this isn't about me. It's about Caleb, and he deserves a father who will never leave again." The silence that followed was heavy. Reporters scribbled notes. Whispers rustled through the benches. Caleb looked up, his face pale, searching his father's expression for any sign of weakness. For the first time, Jonathan didn't look away. The judge cleared her throat, her eyes moving slowly from Madeline to Jonathan, then resting on Caleb. "This court has heard testimony from those who know the boy best, his physician, his teacher, his guardian. The evidence is not financial. It is emotional, and it is clear. The room leaned forward. Jonathan's heart pounded so loudly he was sure Caleb could hear it. "Custody," the judge pronounced, "is hereby awarded to Mr. Jonathan Whitmore." The gavel fell. The sound echoed like thunder, shaking the air, leaving silence in its wake. For a long moment, Jonathan couldn't move. The words seemed unreal, fragile, as if they might vanish if he breathed too hard. Then Caleb slipped from the bench, broke free of Evelyn's hand, and rushed down the aisle. Jonathan knelt just in time to catch him, the boy's arms locking around his neck, fierce and desperate. He held him tight, burying his face in his son's shoulder. "It's over, champ," he whispered, his voice breaking. "You're coming home, with me." Caleb trembled in his embrace, then pressed his face into his father's jacket. His muffled reply was soft but steady. "I believe you." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the courtroom, but Jonathan didn't hear them. The world had narrowed to the boy in his arms. He pulled back just enough to see Caleb's eyes shining, wet, but filled with something new. Trust. Madeline gathered her purse with trembling hands, her pearls catching the light one last time. She walked quickly out of the room, her heels clicking like a retreating drumbeat. No one stopped her. Evelyn approached, her own eyes glistening. She touched Jonathan's shoulder briefly, the faintest smile tugging at her lips. "Now comes the real work," she said softly. Jonathan nodded, pressing a kiss to his son's hair. For the first time in years, he felt light, not because the battle was over, but because he finally knew what he was fighting for. As they stepped out of the courthouse into the late afternoon sun, cameras flashed. Reporters called questions. Jonathan shielded Caleb gently, not to hide him, but to protect his small hand, still clutched in his own. Caleb looked up at him, squinting against the light. "Where do we go now?" Jonathan smiled, a genuine one that reached his tired eyes. "Home. We'll figure out the rest together." And for the first time, the word home didn't feel like marble and silence. It felt like possibility. The October dusk hung low, the sky painted in streaks of lavender and gold, when Jonathan guided the Tesla into the gravel lot of the trailer park. The string lights were already lit, their glow softening the humble row of homes into something almost festive. Evelyn was on the porch, apron dusted with flour, waving them in with a wooden spoon. Inside, the kitchen hummed with life. Harper balanced on a stool, stacking plates with theatrical importance. Caleb stood nearby, watching her, his shoulders tense with the instinct to hold back. Evelyn noticed, clapped her hands, and pointed to the counter. "You two, wash up. Tonight, everyone helps." Jonathan hesitated, unused to the idea of kitchens as places of family gathering rather than staff efficiency. But he rolled up his sleeves, following Caleb to the sink. The boy scrubbed his hands quickly, splashing water. Jonathan copied him, awkward at first. Caleb stifled a laugh, shaking his head. You're not supposed to flood the counter. Jonathan raised his hands in surrender, water dripping. Guess I need a teacher. Caleb grinned faintly, handing him the towel. It was small, but it felt like the first bridge crossed. They sat together, snapping beans. Jonathan fumbled with the ends, breaking them unevenly. Caleb demonstrated, Harper giggled, and soon the rhythm filled the kitchen like a chorus. Jonathan thought, this is music I never heard in the marble halls I built. The table filled with roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, buttered beans, and Evelyn's pumpkin pie cooling on the sill. They sat crowded but content, voices overlapping, forks clinking. Jonathan had dined under chandeliers in Paris, but nothing compared to this. Halfway through, Caleb set down his fork. His eyes fixed on Jonathan, steady, testing. What happens when it's not like this? When it's not easy? The table stilled. Harper looked between them. Evelyn's brow softened but watchful. Jonathan leaned in. Then I'll still be here, especially then. Caleb frowned, pushing food around his plate. You always say things, but you leave. The words hit harder than any cross-examination. Jonathan swallowed, choosing carefully. You're right. I left. And that was wrong. But I'm not leaving again. You can test me, doubt me, even push me away. I'll stay. Caleb searched his face, waiting for the flicker of evasion he'd learned to expect. None came. Slowly, he picked up his fork again. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was something. An opening. After supper, Harper bounced to her feet. Let's go to the market. They'll have music and kettle corn. Evelyn nodded, tying her shawl. Jonathan carried the leftover pie, feeling oddly proud to contribute. The night air was alive when they reached the square. Lanterns swung between stalls of pumpkins and apples. Fiddles and banjos played from a small stage, and neighbors milled about with paper cups of cider. Caleb clung to Jonathan's side at first, eyes darting nervously at the crowd. Stay close, Jonathan murmured, resting a hand on his shoulder. But Caleb's gaze flicked to Harper, who was already tugging him toward the music. Harper pulled Caleb into the circle where kids clapped along to the fiddler's tune. At first he resisted, stiff and self-conscious, the uneven rhythm of his prosthetic drawing stares. But Harper leaned close, whispering, They're not laughing. They're watching you dance. Something shifted. Caleb stepped again, a little bolder, until the awkwardness gave way to laughter. The crowd clapped louder, cheering his spins and stumbles as if they were part of the show. Jonathan stood at the edge, heart hammering. He had spent a lifetime impressing investors and senators, but watching his son stumble bravely before strangers made him prouder than any triumph. Evelyn nudged him. Go on. He doesn't need you on the sidelines. He needs you in the circle. Jonathan hesitated, then stepped forward. Caleb's eyes widened as his father joined the ring, but when Jonathan caught his hand, the boy didn't pull away. They moved together, clumsy but united, Harper clapping in rhythm beside them. Laughter burst from Caleb then, pure and free, and Jonathan felt tears sting behind his glasses. When the music ended, a voice rose from the crowd. Jonathan Whitmore, who's the fine boy with you? A hush fell. Jonathan felt Caleb stiffen, the boy's hand tightening as if ready to bolt. Jonathan squeezed back, lifted his chin, and answered firmly, This is my son, my Caleb. The words carried, clear and unshakable. Applause erupted, neighbors smiling, some clapping Caleb on the back, as if he'd been theirs all along. Caleb stared up at Jonathan, his mouth open, disbelief flickering into something else relief. Jonathan bent low, repeating softly just for him, My son. Caleb's lips trembled. Then he leaned into his father, pressing his face into Jonathan's coat. The boy's voice was muffled but steady. I believe you. Evelyn, watching from the edge, dabbed her eyes with the corner of her shawl. Harper whooped, wrapping her arms around them both, drawing cheers from the crowd. Later, they walked home beneath lanterns swinging in the cool breeze, hands linked, kettle corn crinkling in a paper bag. Back at the trailer, Evelyn sliced the pumpkin pie, serving it warm. Caleb ate slowly, savoring, then set down his fork. Dad? He asked, quiet but sure. Yes, champ, Jonathan replied, bracing himself. Can we do this again tomorrow? Jonathan's smile was wet and wide. Every tomorrow I've got. Harper grinned, bumping Caleb's shoulder. Evelyn hummed softly, her eyes resting on Jonathan not with skepticism now, but with something close to peace. That night, as Caleb drifted to sleep, Harper tucked the family drawing beside his bed. Jonathan lingered in the doorway, watching his son's steady breathing. He thought of marble halls, empty and echoing, and realized they had never been home. This warmth, laughter, imperfection was outside. The trailer park lay quiet under the Texas stars. The string lights swayed gently, as if nodding approval. Jonathan whispered into the dark, not as a vow, but as a truth finally rooted. It's never too late to come home. There's a kind of quiet magic in the way an ordinary evening can become extraordinary, like a simple supper table filled with voices instead of silence, or a boy's laughter rising above music at a small-town market. That was the moment Jonathan finally understood. The greatest victory of his life was not in boardrooms or courtrooms, but in holding his son's hand without fear of letting go. If you felt that this story has touched something true, leave a comment with the number 1. If you think it missed the mark or have thoughts to add, press 0. I'd be grateful to hear what you think. The lesson is clear. Love has the power to redeem. Forgiveness can rebuild what seemed lost. And a family is not measured in marble walls or last names, but in the way we show up for each other day after day. Kindness offered without condition can change the course of a life. Every one of us deserves to be loved and to belong. It's a truth many of you already know. Money fades. Positions are forgotten. But the memory of a father finally saying, "My son," or of a child daring to believe it, endures longer than any fortune. Like the porch light burning steady in the Texas night, even the smallest gesture of care can guide us home through the darkest roads. Think of your own life. The family suppers where you squeeze too many chairs around the table, the Sunday mornings when neighbors drop by with a pie, the way a grandchild's story can brighten an entire afternoon. These are not small things. They are the real foundations of a life well lived. Just as Caleb found his voice when someone listened, we too can help others shine, simply by making space for them, whether at a crowded dinner table or in the quiet of our hearts. So as this story closes, maybe take a moment to reflect. Is there someone you could reach out to? A relationship you could mend? A word of forgiveness you could offer? Because the chance to begin again is never gone. It waits at every table, on every porch, in every gathering where love has a seat. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to share it with someone who might need a reminder of hope. After all, it's never too late to come home.